Woman, an in-depth exploration of the world of women today with Samantha Dean.
Good evening. Tonight we're going to be talking about self-examination and the self-help clinics which are proliferating all over the country. These are a rather radical offshoot of the feminist movement. Our guests with us tonight are Lolly and Jean Hirsch. They're the first mother and daughter feminist team since Eileen and Christabel Pankhurst. Lolly, one of your basic contentions is that women have not taken an active enough part in their own health care up to date. Now, do you feel that women are partly to blame for this, for their own inertia and apathy perhaps, or do you attribute it all to the dominance of the male-dominated medical profession?
Well, it's been this last 100 years, 100 years ago, that the male completely took over the whole field of gynecology. You speak to that.
Right, and in England and in Europe, the first doctor to ever deliver a child was done illegally 150 years ago. At that time, it was illegal for a man to deliver a child. Today, it's illegal for a woman practicing as a midwife in this country to deliver a child. The first man who did this dressed in full drag, wearing women's clothes, a veil covering his beard, and he delivered the baby from under a sheet without looking because of modesty problems.
But up until that time, in all the cultures throughout our whole history, women have always taken care of themselves and each other. And in this last 100 years, it was pointed out in a paper that we have been discussing from Detroit, The Cutting Edge, a look at male motivation in gynecology, that when it was very clear that there's a big financial reward from the male taking over the whole field of gynecology, but then it was completely taken over.
Also, in every country in the world other than Western modern civilization, every other culture has places where women can go, menstrual homes, where women go each month and they take care of each other's needs. There's always been women controlling the field of obstetrics and gynecology and caring for each other and communicating with each other. In this culture, communication has broken down between women, where mothers and daughters don't generally speak with each other, and I don't speak to my sister, etc., etc. And these are some of the things we're trying to break down and establish communication again so women can start finding out what is going on and then seeing what we want to do about it.
Well, now, along these lines, you've set up a number, or you've been instrumental in setting up a number of these self-help clinics throughout the country. Could you explain a little bit about these, how they work, who they're intended for, who operates them, and so on?
Well, the self-help clinic is not a clinic in the traditional way. It's a group of women coming together in what in the women's movement is called consciousness raising, where women come together, share information, and in this case it would be gynecological information. They would examine themselves and each other vaginally, share experiences, share observations, and then if they were so inclined to decide on some particular area of research, that then they would initiate a research program. For instance, hormonal imbalance, that maybe one group would want to study do a study of hormones.
Or menstruation.
Or menstruation, or doing our own pap smears. For instance, in a university such as you have here in Buffalo, that maybe some woman, a student at the college in the field of biology, could set up as her term paper a study of pap smear analysis, and that women could learn pap smear analysis. At this point, even though a pap smear is traditional with every time that you go for an examination at a gynecologist, there is no access to pap smear. They're setting up kits that women could use, but there's no way that we can get an analysis of a pap smear unless it has to be given by a doctor and the information given back to a doctor. But now a young woman doing a research paper on pap smear analysis could do analysis for some group. But these are the kinds of things that women could start initiating and start regaining the control.
Information on the female cycle and all the various changes is very scanty, and research money is never allocated, or in very slight amounts, allocated for research on menstruation, on ovulation, on cyclic changes that a female goes through. Very little of that research money goes to women to do the research. Most of it is in birth control research. It goes to men to do their research and experimentation on women in birth control. We are beginning to think that some of the money should be going to women to do research, since it's our bodies that we're dealing with, and that some of the research can also be done on male contraception.
The one point too about self-help clinics, as I say, groups, it's not a place, it's a group of women, is that we are normal, healthy women. And our feeling is that a woman who is menstruating, a woman who is terminating a pregnancy, a woman who is delivering a child, a woman who is in menopause,
Or
is a
ovulating.
normal, or ovulating, is a normal, healthy, functioning woman. She is not sick. She has been regarded sick by a medical profession who has seen a financial reward in terming her sick.
Right. Several years ago, there was a study in, I think it was Fortune magazine, where they said that gynecologists are the most overtrained, overpaid, and underutilized of all professions. And that's not just medical professions, but all professions. And they're trained to detect the occasional abnormality. And you know, these abnormalities do exist, but they're much less frequent than we're led to believe. And many times when we go to a gynecologist as a healthy woman, say we have a menstrual cramp or something, and we're made to feel that we're abnormal, and we go there in isolation, we don't have other women to confer with, and we spend our money, you know, being told that we're abnormal, when many times it's just a perfectly normal part of our cycle.
All right, well, the people who run these self-help clinics, how do they gather their expertise, their knowledge in the field?
Neither of us have any medical training, and neither of us have any academic degrees. And in this past year, it's been blowing our own minds how quickly we learn by self-observation. Many times when you look in a textbook at an illustration or at a plastic diagram of the pelvic area that you see in hospitals and clinics, you don't learn as quickly as when you see the real cervix, and you start learning on our own bodies.
And
That's what we've been
also,
doing.
comparing different women, you begin to recognize the trivial mania, the common infection, the itching infection
That everyone gets.
that everyone gets at one time or another.
How do most people react when they see their own cervix for the first time?
It blows their brain. The first cervix
The
Jean
first
ever
cervix
saw.
I ever saw was my mother's, and everybody said to me, "Oh, look, that's where you came out." And that was really quite an experience.
It
And
really
as a matter of
is.
fact, I was wondering how many gynecologists ever had that experience, and if any of them would like to have that, that experience, seeing where they came from.
But in certain cases, you would certainly refer people to
Oh,
a qualified
absolutely.
gynecologist.
A sick woman should seek medical help. And if she's sick in a gynecological way, she should seek help from a gynecologist.
Right, but one of the things
Absolutely.
that we're doing is to keep track of the doctors, you know, and to keep files on different doctors. Every woman coming will have experiences with so many doctors, and we keep records of what kind of treatment she got and how she experienced the doctor and what kind of follow-up, et cetera, so that a new woman coming to town will have a file to go to, and she can choose her doctor according to other women's experience. and
It's
according
great,
to
so
the
she doesn't have to
expertise.
shop around.
Now, the
Right.
other thing is that in a self-help group, if you meet regularly, once a week, once every 2 weeks, I keep my own file card of my own observations of my own self. Then I have the most complete record on my vaginal area that I can go to a gynecologist and say, this is my history up to this point. And it should be a great boon to a professional to have this kind of reference.
Going informed.
Because to go for a checkup once every 6 months or to go once a year, they don't know your lifestyle, they don't know your pattern, your way of life. They have no way of, other than just seeing you in this isolated along with, because one woman said that she sat through a whole interview with her gynecologist and he had the wrong file paper.
It's incredible.
And kept calling her the wrong name, and at first she started to correct him, and then she was so embarrassed for him that she didn't want to
My
point
goodness.
out his error.
Also,
But we are intimidated by the profession, by any profession.
How many of these clinics exist up to date, do you know?
They're all over the country. But it's small groups of women, and they form and they fall apart and they form. This is one of the things that we want to do now. I had a group that was meeting in my house in suburbia once a week for about 2 months, and then spring came and some got jobs. One got a job with the opera in New York, and some went to school, and you know, it all broke apart. But one of the things that we want to do now is to start establishing goals for groups, because the first thing to do is to examine yourself and each other vaginally, to keep a file card on yourself, then to go into pelvic examination to become more acquainted. Then the next thing to do is the Cancer Society has brochures and diagrams on doing breast examination. And we are extending their, allowing us to examine our breasts one step further in vaginal examination. But the next step is to start having concrete goals for each group to take on some facet of research. Then the thing that we're doing is this newsletter called The Monthly Extract, an irregular periodical. And it's a newsletter that's to tie together all these various groups and to give the addresses and the time and place that these various groups meet around the country, and that then they can communicate with each other. And that then as they do research and term papers at Antioch, some young women stopped by during the Christmas holidays to see me. And they said that all their term papers that last term were on aspects of gynecology. And they said, our papers were better than anything that you're publishing. So I said, okay, great. Let me advertise your papers in our monthly extract, and then women can send you 50 cents for mailing Xerox copies of your paper. And it's a way of really getting information out.
Yes, that's excellent. One of the procedures which you advocate is menstrual extraction. Could you give a definition of this term and explain the
First of all, let me say that we don't advocate this procedure because we're not in a position to advocate it. First of all, we're only describing the procedure and then saying that it is being done by women in the women's movement.
Right. Would you like to describe what it is exactly?
First, let me describe the speculum and show how this works, because this is the basic tool of the Self-Help Clinic. The speculum is inserted into the vagina. This part goes in, and these duckbills are closed. And then this clasp here snaps open, and it snaps open, and then our hands are free to hold a mirror with one hand and a light with the other, and we get to view our own cervix. Now we insert the speculum with the handle up, so we have complete control over it, and we know how it feels and if it's comfortable and so on. And with this little gadget, this is where it all begins. Then menstrual extraction is at a much later time, after we've become very aware of changes in the cervix and our own norm and what changes we go through each month.
Just let me ask you a couple of questions about the speculum, since you have it right there. First of all, it's plastic. Can you sterilize this?
This could be sterilized in a plastic liquid solution if we wanted to, but we always think that the vagina is an opening in our body similar to the mouth, which is another opening in our body, and that everything that goes in the vagina is not sterile. As you know, everything isn't boiled for 20 minutes.
So it is reasonably clean.
Right, you know. That general cleanliness and hygiene is of course the most important thing, but it doesn't have to be sterilized.
It's the same as tampons or douches. Or
Now, by examining yourself, can you detect a pregnancy earlier than you would from a laboratory test, for instance?
You can identify the trivial infection of Manila usually. You can identify and seek help for more complicated infections, that the odor changes, the color changes, there are all kinds of changes. You could see an irregularity that might warn you that maybe cancer, you would be cancerous. If you know your own lifestyle, you may know whether you would be prone or susceptible to a venereal disease, and you would immediately recognize changes and want to seek help instantly. This is #1 epidemic in the United States right now, and it's very serious. There is a distinct change. If you know that have been observing your cervix regularly, there is a distinct change that occurs within 3 to 5 days after conception. The medical profession calls it softening, they call it blue. There is a distinct change in color and shape in the cervix, which you could be the first to know when you're pregnant.
This change takes place 3 to 5 days after conception. So it's an immediate and a very apparent and obvious
And the
change.
thing is that with women, once they begin to learn about themselves and know about themselves, that they can choose the time when it is the best time for them to have a baby. Because there are times in our life when it is not convenient, it's not the right time to have a baby. Financially, emotionally, there are all kinds of things that have to be taken into consideration when we are going to take on the responsibility. And so far in our society, the female does have prime responsibility for the children. This isn't as it should be, but since we do have that responsibility, then we have to know the right time to have a baby.
One of our friends said that the vagina is political territory because every human life enters the world through that passageway, and therefore, since it's in our bodies, we have to maintain some control over it. So, since you asked about menstrual extraction, go back to that.
All right.
This is a plastic cannula, and it's 4 millimeters, very flexible plastic. It's closed off at one end, and it has 2 slits in it. And this is a 6 millimeter cannula. Now, is a device that has been in the hands of the medical profession for a good 20
years at least.
And it's an abortion device, and it's been used.
It was developed by old-time abortionists.
Right, it's been available to hospitals and doctors and clinics to be used as abortion technique. However, when we observe abortions in the hospital, we see that they are not using this very simple technique of abortion, where this is inserted
Non-traumatic.
through the os, through the cervical canal, into the uterus, and when it hits the back wall, you can see it's very flexible, and it conforms to the wall so that there's no possibility of perforation. This is sterilized. To enter the uterus has to be sterile.
Same as catheters would be.
This is a 4 millimeter cannula, so that when it enters the uterus, there's no trauma and no dilation. I've
No
never
laceration.
had children. I've never had children myself, and this has been entered my uterus for menstrual extraction with no dilation and no trauma, no anesthesia, and so on.
no
so
pain.
this has been used, can be used in hospitals for abortion. When we go visit the abortion clinics, I've seen clinics now in California and in New York, and they do not use this very simple and humane technique. They use a series of many instruments. They go in first with a sounder to determine the length and the shape of the uterus. Nurses have told us that the sounder, this first instrument, is the one which causes the most possibility of perforation, because in determining the distance of the uterus, many times it goes right through the uterus. The next instruments used are dilators to varying sizes, where this is a 4 millimeter and not traumatizing the uterus. I personally had an abortion in New York where I was dilated to 35 millimeters, which is about the size of a quarter. And in comparison to this, it's quite a bit larger. This 6 millimeter would be sufficient for an 8-week abortion, first trimester abortion in a clinic. There's no reason to go past 6 millimeters, though they do. As I said, in my case, they went to 35 millimeters. Then they go in with a curette, which is an instrument shaped like a spoon at one end with a hole in it and a very sharp blade. And this is used to scrape the wall of the uterus. They go in with steel cannula rather than this very flexible plastic. And basically, it's a very traumatic ordeal. Anesthesia is used. Many times women will react to the anesthesia. Many times the doctors won't allow the anesthesia to set. They'll start dilating before it takes effect.
This is very new, though, isn't it? It's only about a year and a half old, isn't that right?
The what?
Oh,
This.
The
this
cannula?
right.
technique,
Now, we
yes.
were talking, I was just describing the
Oh.
cannula as it could be used for abortions.
Right, yeah.
Now,
But
it's
the
been
cannula's been
used
around for 20 years.
For 20 years. Okay, now, as a form of menstrual extraction, which is as it's being used in the women's movement, which means that we insert that little 4 millimeter cannula and we extract our entire menstrual flow in 5 minutes rather than allowing it to continue for 5 days. Now, this has a lot of purposes. This has only been used, as you said, for a year and a half in the women's movement. And we use it, first of all, to understand the technology, basically, to realize how simple a procedure it is. So when we go to the clinics and the hospitals, we can compare the technology and know which is the better one. We know it's simple enough that every nurse and every paramedic in the hospital can learn the technique,
Every
and that
counselor.
in clinics, all they need would be one doctor in a clinic as a backup for the occasional emergency, and that nurses and paramedics and even the counselors can be doing this very simple procedure. Now, for menstrual extraction, we're doing it as to get rid of our period, if we go camping, if we pose nude in art class.
If you're a ballet dancer.
One friend of ours was having an affair. Lots of reasons why we would do it.
Would you also use it as a method of birth control?
Could be.
Potentially, this could be
The
once
same
a
as an
month.
IUD, that a pregnancy can occur each month with an IUD in, that this could be also.
Except the difference between this and an IUD is that this cannula would enter the uterus for 5 minutes out of the month, whereas the IUD, of course, is a mechanical device which is inside the uterus 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, constantly irritating the uterus.
Which is carcinogenic, cancer-inducing.
Right. So that this little
And the string
Introduction.
on the IUD is now found to serve as a conduit for infection. And the medical profession gets very upset about women experimenting with a cannula entering the uterus. Yet this IUD string, which has been placed in the cervical canal and in the uterus, has acted as a conduit for infection and introduced infection into the uterus.
Really? So-
We
had-
learn from our audiences.
yeah, a woman in one audience described
Peritonitis.
getting peritonitis and being in the hospital for 8 days from an IUD string. I looked up peritonitis and it said that it could cause death within 24 hours. It's a very serious infection.
But when you use this as a means of menstrual extraction for abortion or birth control, How do you know that you're getting the fertilized egg? Because it's so minute. You might get a mass, but how do you know that you've got everything?
Well, this is, you can, if the woman is still pregnant, if you're concerned about pregnancy, well, then you could do it again at another session. It's not like an abortion where you go over, it's always been that you go to some other state or you go to some other country to have an abortion. So the woman doesn't want to make the trip again, and the doctor never wants to see the woman again. And it's in a situation of a self-help group where women are concerned about each other. There isn't that pressure of
and with a straight
complete
menstrual extraction, if everything is not removed, well, you just continue your normal period.
Now there's one other point that I want to make. You know, it's not just controlling terminating pregnancies that I'm concerned with, because I've had 5 children. I am also concerned with one aspect of self-help, is that we also start recognizing women in child delivery. And recently up in Westport, Dorothy Tenoff and I have been taping women's childbirth experiences. We brought together 5 women. Amongst us, we'd had 16 children. And the first taping session was about 3 hours. And there is distinct thread of unkind treatment that has been accorded women, physical and psychological. And we are now amassing enough evidence that we feel,
By the medical profession.
well,
From
the
women.
only way that we have babies is within the confines of the
country,
hospital
right,
in this
yes.
country, because it is illegal. Midwifery is illegal in most states, but about 4 states. We're examining, well, anyway, as we started to do this taping, and now we've been taping every Sunday afternoon in her office, and women are beginning to want to come just as a catharsis for some of the terrible experiences that they've gone through. And one of the things that we have recognized is that the same way 3 years ago that women in New York came together to have a speak out on abortion, and which triggered this whole pressure in New York State to go to Albany and to get the laws changed.
And which has resulted in the Supreme Court
And
decision.
yeah, because it was women really coming out and the pressure being applied. Then a year ago, women in New York City started to had this speak out on rape, where women came into the public domain and started talking about their rape experiences. And it wasn't until they started to air these experiences that anti-rape squads started to be formed, that now in some cities, the police department has a hotline to the Women's Center, and that when a rape victim comes in, that feminists can get down and help this woman get through
That's
the
tremendous.
experience that she has. Well, from this, I had certain, in 5 deliveries, I have had certain experiences that I had never shared with anyone. And I began to get inklings that maybe there were other women that had had similar experiences. I never talked about things like this. And we started this taping, and now there is a definite need for a childbirth conference, which Dorothy and I are planning in Stamford, Connecticut, June 2nd, this spring. We've got our mailing all ready to go out for this conference. And each woman that participates in this conference will come prepared to give a 5-minute presentation, which would be a 3-page double-spaced paper, on some aspect. We are going to have the experiences, tapes and tapes and tapes of experiences, which incidentally we're going to play at the NOW conference the weekend of February 17th in Washington, D.C. But so we'll have taped experiences, and we want the women to come with research that they've done on various facets of childbirth, the standard techniques that are used in the hospital, the Lamaze method that is used within the hospital, education for childbirth, which are ideas to deliver outside the hospital situation, studies on analgesics, anesthesias, reactions, women,
Now this conference is not just for women who've born children,
No,
but also
no.
for women like myself who have not yet given birth, and in choosing about giving birth and when I'm going to and if I'm going to, all of these things, I have to know from these older women what their experiences have been, so that I can either avoid certain types of things or try and get them changed before I'm ready to deliver, or seek alternatives. And one of the alternatives is delivering in the home, setting up homes, birthing homes outside of the hospital situation where all of this activity could take place. Because in a hospital it's treated as a disease, you know, and a pregnant woman
It's
is
listed as a
considered
disease
sick.
in the medical books.
Really?
Yeah.
Pregnancy is a
Wow.
disease.
You mentioned earlier on the possibility of performing pap smear tests in the home. Do you think this will be a reality in the foreseeable future?
Yes.
Oh,
definitely.
yes, they have the kits all. We know the guy that was engineering one of the kits for one of the big pharmaceutical companies. And when we went to him and asked him about the available of pap smear kits to our group, he said, this isn't for women like you. You can afford a doctor.
Oh.
But there's kind of a catch-22 because the only place you can get a pap smear kit is through your private doctor. But if you go to a private doctor, you can't get a pap smear kit because you can afford to go to a private doctor. So they've got it all tied up. And we're trying to break that down. Ultimately, we will. We'll be doing our own pap smears.
I'd just like to ask both of you before we close how you got interested in this field and how you got involved in this.
It's incredible that I was pulled into this field. It's
We have to say that Carol Downer has originated this whole concept, and it was through her mind that this whole thing came into being, that she saw the political aspect of using a plastic speculum, and that she engineered bringing it cross country and setting up this kind of clinic all across country. She with Lorraine Rothman, the two of them together, have started
and there was no one
created.
on the East Coast to do it, and they had done their talk all around the East Coast and left the slides because they had to get back to California before they did one presentation. So we just filled in for them. And here a year later, we're now booked
Well, that's
up into 73.
That's tremendous. Really think you're doing a great job.
It's a lot of fun. It's much more fun than housework.
Oh, that I bet. Thank you very much, both of you, Jean and Lolly Hirsch. Thank you for being with us. Good night from Woman.